It's Ryan from Offsides Designs, and I'm here to share 5 woodworking safety tips that I wish I knew earlier. All right, tip number 1 is to wear a mask. This is something that I did shortly after beginning woodworking, and the reason for this is because I really felt like after a day of woodworking that I'd feel it in my chest until the next day. So I started wearing a mask, and that helped out a lot. And then since it helped out a good amount, I looked into a good mask that will filter out various things like dust particles and finish and smells and all of that. And I landed on this 3M mask 7502. I'll put a link in the description of what this one is, but I found that this has been super helpful, especially with just not feeling like I'm breathing through a tube at the end of the day. It is, it's not the most convenient and comfortable thing to do. After using it for a couple of sessions, you'll get used to it. Really, it's the first thing that I put on when I start woodworking. I use it almost 100% of the time. I only take it off if I'm drinking something or if whatever I'm doing in the shop that day isn't creating much dust. But even if I take a cut on the table saw and then am doing something that isn't super dust centric, I still wear the mask. But I think it's such a small thing that helps, that has a great impact. So that's definitely my number 1 tip for safety in the shop. Number 2 tip, always knowing where your hands are. So before I do any task in the wood shop, I think about, okay, where are my hands gonna be? What are my hands doing during this movement in order to keep my hands safe? One of my biggest fears in being in the shop is losing a finger or a hand. I do not take that lightly. And so every time I move my hand, every time I do a cut, before I think about, okay, my hand's gonna go here and I'm gonna move it this way. And is that a safe way to do things? And then while I'm making the cut, I'm always conscious of where my hands are. So far, so good. So the third tip kind of goes in line with number 1, and that is getting a dust collection system as well as an air filter. When I first started and I only was using a shop vac, my garage would be full of sawdust, even on the corners opposite of all of the tools. It got to a point where it was getting too crazy. There would be 1/4 of an inch of sawdust on the shelves everywhere, and everything, the shelves that you had to use, you had to dust it off. Dust collection system was one of the first big tools that I invested in, and it's been night and day difference. You talk about what are some essentials to have in your wood shop. A dust collection system is at the top of that list. It's a must. And then the air filter is nice. It's not as big of a boost as a dust collection system will give you, but it is nice to have, and I do feel that it does make a difference, especially getting those small dust particles. I don't have the most robust system that goes up the walls and hooks into every tool that I have. It's more of a portable system, and that's kind of what works with me. The air filter is nice. It gives me the peace of mind. Even with the dust collection, after a session in the shop, there would be some dust particles that are flying around, and if you were to come back into the garage a couple hours later, you would still kind of smell the dust. Whereas when I have the dust collection and the air filter together, it really does clean the shop. Maybe this isn't that big of an issue if you have a dedicated shop, but since my shop is in my garage and we're doing life in here as well, it is important for us to keep it as clean as possible. If you need another reason to justify dust collection system, I would spend a lot of time using my shop vac to vacuum up big piles after sweeping the sawdust from a project or a day's work. And the dust collection just makes it so much simpler and easier. You're not only going to get the dust when you create it right away, if it's hooked into the tool, that saves time, but also it's just bigger. So if you do have to vacuum up something, it doesn't take as much time. So you will be saving a good amount of time with a dust collection system rather than using a shop vac. Number 4 is a sneaky one, and I don't hear this one mentioned as much in other people's videos. It was something that I was doing incorrectly for a good amount of time until I came across it somewhere and I started implementing it because it is a big issue, and that is having a finishing bucket. Now, what this means is having a place or a system, put your finishing rags and sponges, and I have syringes that I use for finishing. All the tools and all of the little things that I use for finishing, I throw into this bucket that's full of water, because things like that, if they're they're not taken seriously and if they're not handled properly, there can be some combustion issues and you could start a fire that you don't want. And I just don't hear this one mentioned enough. This is one that needs to be taken seriously because it can cause some serious damage. I think finding a system that works for you, something like mine, or if you want to air dry, I know some people do that, handling your finishing rags and sponges and all of the stuff that you use for finishing is super important. As somebody who posts a lot of their work on social media, I have gotten some feedback on how I do things around my shop, as you might guess. The number 5 tip is having appropriate attire. It's been pointed out to me in the past that my sleeves have been too dangly or way too close to the machines, and I've made quick adjustments on kind of setting a uniform that I have in my shop. I tend to wear the same stuff. It goes in line with knowing where your hands are and your fingers, knowing where your sleeves are, where your arms are, if you are wearing like a sweatshirt or something. So this is my garage, so it gets very cold. And in the winter time, 20 degrees in here sometimes, and I have the heater on, but I am wearing a sweatshirt or a jacket, so there are sleeves. So just being mindful of where your sleeves are. Maybe if you have a baggy shirt, I'd pick a different shirt. And then while we're on the topic of a uniform or attire, having correct footwear is important as well. You kind of moving around some heavy stuff, lumber. It only makes sense to wear some nice boots. Don't do that all the time. So hand up, I do break this rule sometimes because tennis shoes are just a little bit easier and more comfortable. If we're making the rules here, it is a good recommendation to have steel toe boot in the shop. Another thing that I use, it just makes things easier. I don't really care about being too protective because, you know, at the end of the day, like I have to keep going. I don't need to muscle through this. So I do wear a shield sometimes, especially if I'm on the lathe. I have had things fly off the lathe and hit me in the shield. It would have hit me in the face. I think I have a nice scuff on my shield. And then also like using the router, sometimes you have to get pretty close and the router is spitting stuff at you and you have to get your face right in there. And it's just so much easier to wear a shield where I can just see everything and it's just, you know, bouncing off the shield and not in my eyeballs, not in my glasses, not all over my face, not in my mouth. The shield, it's a good tool. I would recommend it. Honorable mention, the table saw. It's an honorable mention just because it's luxury item. I need to mention it in the safety video because it's given me a lot of peace of mind, especially using the table saw. Even if something were to slip up on the table saw, there's the added layer of it hopefully and will stop if it were to detect my finger, which is just, again, it's a very expensive machine. So I know that it's not super accessible, especially to those who are starting the hobby or even have a successful hobby in even business. But I would really recommend it. There's just so much to life that you use your hands with. I fear that something would happen in here. If you do want to justify the cost, you could always think about, okay, how much will the emergency room, how much will surgery, whatever you need to do, if something were to happen, how much would that cost and how much would it cost to just get a Sawstop? I know everybody loves them in the industry and there's a reason for that, and that's because of safety, number one. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.